Captain Dong-wook stared at the massive structure floating in the empty space between galaxies. The thing was huge, bigger than any space station humans had ever built. It looked like a giant metal flower with countless petals spreading out in all directions. Each petal was the size of a city, and they all glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "How long has this thing been out here?" Dong-wook asked his crew on the bridge of the human exploration ship. Perseverance. Chief Engineer Hai-jin checked her readings. "The metal shows signs of being at least 50,000 years old, Captain. Maybe older. The technology is completely unknown to us." Navigator Taeho turned from his station. "Sir, I'm picking up some strange energy readings from inside the structure. It's not giving off any signals we can understand, but something is definitely active in there." Security Chief So-young crossed her arms. "I don't like it, Captain. We're 3 months away from the nearest human outpost. If something goes wrong out here, we're on our own." Communications Officer Ji-woo spoke up from her station. "Captain, I'm detecting what might be docking ports along the outer edge. They look big enough for our ship, but the design is completely alien." Dong-wook had been exploring space for 15 years. He had seen many strange things, but nothing like this. The structure was clearly built by an intelligent species, but it was too old and too advanced for any race humans had met before. "Dr. Minho, what do you think?" Dong-wook asked the ship's scientist. The young doctor looked up from his instruments. "The composition is unlike anything in our databases, Captain. Whatever species built this had technology far beyond ours. But the interesting thing is that it seems to be waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" "I'm not sure. The energy patterns suggest the structure is in some kind of standby mode, like it's sleeping and ready to wake up when the right conditions are met." Dong-wook thought about their mission. Earth had sent them to explore this region of space after long-range telescopes detected unusual energy signatures. The discovery of this ancient structure would be the find of the century. It could advance human technology by hundreds of years. But something felt wrong about it. "Captain," Hai-jin called out, "I'm detecting debris fields around the structure. Lots of them." "What kind of debris?" "Ship fragments, sir, from multiple species. Some of the metal types match known alien civilizations, but others are completely unknown. The debris fields form rough circles around the structure at different distances." So-young moved to look at the tactical display. "How many ships are we talking about?" "Hard to say exactly, but I count at least 40 different debris fields. Some are very old. Others look more recent. The newest might be from just a few years ago." The bridge fell silent. 40 ships from different species, all destroyed near this ancient structure. It could be a coincidence, but Dong-wook had learned not to believe in coincidences when exploring unknown space. "Sir," Taeho said quietly, "I'm also detecting some intact ships embedded in the outer petals of the structure. They look like they've been there for a long time." "Embedded how?" "It's hard to explain. The structure seems to have grown around them, like they got stuck and couldn't get out." Ji-woo turned to face the captain. "Captain, I'm receiving a signal from the structure. It's very faint, but it's definitely artificial. Can you decode it?" "It's not a communication signal, sir. It's more like a scanning beam. The structure is examining our ship." As if responding to Ji-woo's words, the blue glow from the structure suddenly got brighter. The pulsing light began to move in patterns across the metal petals, like waves spreading out from the center. "Energy output is increasing," Hai-jin reported. "Whatever was sleeping in there is waking up." Dong-wook felt his stomach tighten. "All stop. Take us back to a safe distance." "Sir," Taeho said, his voice tense. "The navigation controls aren't responding. Something is interfering with our systems." The structure's glow became even brighter, and now Dong-wook could see movement within the petals. Mechanical arms and unknown devices were extending from hidden compartments. The ancient technology was coming to life after thousands of years of sleep. "Captain," Dr. Minho said, studying his readings, "the structure is generating some kind of field around us. It's affecting our ship's systems." "What kind of field?" "I'm not sure, but it's preventing us from moving away. We're being pulled toward one of the docking ports." So-young checked her weapon systems. "Sir, our defensive systems are also being affected. I can't get a target lock on anything." The Perseverance began to drift slowly toward the ancient structure. Despite all their efforts, the ship was being drawn in like a piece of metal toward a magnet. The crew could only watch as they approached one of the alien docking ports. "This is exactly what happened to all those other ships," Taeho said grimly. As they got closer, Dong-wook could see details of the structure's surface. The metal was covered in symbols and patterns that seemed to move and change when he looked at them directly. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "Captain," Ji-woo announced, "I'm detecting life support systems activating in the docking bay. Whatever built this thing knew we were coming and prepared for us." The docking was smooth and automatic. The ancient systems handled their ship with perfect precision, as if they had been designed specifically for this purpose. When the docking clamps engaged, Dong-wook felt a slight vibration through the floor. "Atmosphere in the docking bay is breathable," Dr. Minho reported. "Oxygen and nitrogen mix suitable for humans. Temperature is comfortable." "How is that possible?" So-young asked. "This thing is 50,000 years old. How could it know what humans need to breathe?" "Maybe it doesn't," Hee-jin said quietly. "Maybe it just creates whatever atmosphere it detects from our ship." A new sound filled the bridge, a deep humming that seemed to come from the structure itself. Through the viewports, they could see lights turning on throughout the docking bay, revealing a vast space filled with strange machinery. "Well," Dong-wook said, looking at his crew, "we came here to explore. Looks like we're going to get that chance whether we want it or not." The ancient structure had awakened, and humanity was about to face its first real test among the stars. The airlock door opened with a soft hiss, and Captain Dong-wook stepped into the alien docking bay with his crew. The air smelled metallic and old, like an ancient machine that had been sleeping for thousands of years. Strange lights flickered along the walls, creating shadows that seemed to dance and move. "Stay close together," So-young ordered, checking her weapon. "We don't know what kind of defenses this place might have." The docking bay was enormous, much larger than it had appeared from outside. The ceiling stretched up so high that it disappeared into darkness. Along the walls they could see the remains of other ships, some embedded so deeply into the metal that only pieces were visible. "Look at this," Dr. Minho said, approaching the nearest alien wreck. "This ship design is completely unknown to me. The metal has been fused with the structure itself." Hee-jin ran her scanner over the debris. "These readings are strange, Captain. It's like the ship didn't crash here. It looks like it was absorbed into the structure while the crew was still inside." "Are there any bodies?" Dong-wook asked. "None that I can detect, but there are traces of organic matter mixed with the metal. Whatever happened here, it happened fast." A deep sound echoed through the bay like a bell ringing underwater. The lights on the walls began to pulse in a steady rhythm, and a section of the far wall started to open. "That must be our way in," Taeho said, pointing to the opening doorway. Ji-woo held up her communication device. "I'm picking up a signal from deeper in the structure. It's some kind of automated message, but I can't translate it. Can you tell what it's saying?" "Not the words, but the tone sounds like instructions, like someone giving directions to a new place." As they walked toward the opening, Dong-wook noticed something odd about the floor. It was covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them. When he tried to focus on one symbol, it would blur and become something else. "Does anyone else see the floor moving?" he asked. "The symbols are changing," Hee-jin confirmed, "but they're not actually moving. I think they're designed to confuse anyone who looks at them directly." They passed through the doorway and found themselves in a long corridor. The walls were smooth and curved, like the inside of a giant tube. More strange lights provided dim illumination, and the air felt thick and heavy. "Captain," So-young said, "I'm getting a bad feeling about this place. Every instinct I have is telling me we're walking into a trap." "I know, but we don't have much choice. Our ship is locked in the docking bay, and the only way out seems to be forward." After walking for several minutes, they reached another doorway. This one was different, covered in complex patterns that hurt to look at. As they approached, the patterns began to move and swirl like water. The doorway opened, and they stepped into a vast circular room. The moment they crossed the threshold, the door sealed behind them with a solid thunk. "Well," Dong-wook said, "I guess we're committed now." The room was unlike anything they had ever seen. The walls, floor, and ceiling were all made of the same strange metal, but gravity seemed to work differently here. Water was flowing upward along one wall, while debris floated in mid-air throughout the space. "This is impossible," Taeho said, watching a piece of alien metal drift past his head. "Gravity is pulling in multiple directions at once." Hae-jin checked her instruments. "I'm reading at least 6 different gravity fields in this room, all pulling in different directions. The fields are constantly shifting and changing." As if responding to her words, the gravity in their section of the room suddenly shifted. Dong-wook felt his stomach lurch as up became down and down became sideways. The crew was thrown in different directions as the forces changed. "Everyone grab onto something," So Young shouted, but there was nothing to grab. They were all floating in the middle of the room as gravity pulled them in different directions. Dr. Minho pointed to the center of the room. "Look, there are alien bodies floating there." In the shifting gravity fields, they could see the remains of several different alien species. Some looked like they had been torn apart by the conflicting forces, while others appeared to have been crushed. All of them had expressions of terror and confusion frozen on their faces. "This is the first trial," Ji-woo said, her voice tight with fear. "The structure is testing us just like it tested them." "But they all failed," Taeho observed. "How are we supposed to survive something that killed all these other species?" The gravity fields shifted again, more violently this time. Dong-wook felt like he was being pulled in 4 different directions at once. His inner ear was screaming in confusion, and he could feel his equilibrium starting to fail. But then something strange happened. Instead of panicking like the alien remains suggested their predecessors had, Dong-wook found himself adapting. Growing up on Earth, humans had developed excellent balance systems. They were used to changing conditions, from walking on unsteady ground to dealing with motion sickness. "Everyone listen to me," he called out to his crew. "Don't fight the gravity changes, try to move with them instead." "What do you mean?" Hae-jin asked, spinning slowly through the air. "Think of it like surfing, or like being on a boat in rough water. Don't resist the motion, use it." So Young, with her military training, understood first. She began to adjust her body position with each gravity shift, using the changing forces to control her movement instead of fighting them. "I see what you mean, Captain. It's like combat training. You use your opponent's strength against them." One by one, the crew began to adapt. Taeho used his navigation skills to track the patterns of the gravity shifts. Hae-jin applied her engineering knowledge to understand the forces involved. Dr. Minho observed how the different gravity fields interacted. "The shifts aren't random," Taeho announced. "There's a pattern. The gravity changes every 12 seconds and it follows a sequence." "Can you predict the next change?" Dong-wook asked. "I think so. The pattern seems to repeat every 6 changes." Working together, the crew began to navigate the deadly room. They used the gravity shifts to move toward the far wall, where they could see another doorway. It was difficult and dangerous, but their human ability to adapt to changing conditions gave them an advantage the other species had lacked. "Almost there," Hae-jin called out as they approached the exit. Just as they reached the doorway, the gravity field suddenly stopped shifting. Everything in the room fell to the floor with a crash, including the alien remains they had seen floating earlier. "Why did it stop?" Dr. Minho asked, picking himself up from the floor. "Maybe because we solved it," So Young suggested. "Maybe. The test was to see if we could adapt instead of being destroyed." As they stood in front of the exit, the doorway began to open. Beyond it, they could see another corridor leading deeper into the ancient structure. "One trial down," Dong-wook said, looking back at the room that had killed so many others. "Let's hope the next one doesn't try to tear us apart." The crew moved forward into the unknown, not knowing that they had just accomplished something no other species had ever managed. They had survived the first trial of the ancient structure, and word of their success was already spreading through the dormant systems deeper within. Something was taking notice of these strange new visitors, and it was very interested in what they might do next. The corridor beyond the gravity room was different from the first one. The walls here were covered in smooth, mirror-like surfaces that reflected their images in strange ways. Sometimes the reflections moved when they stood still, and sometimes they showed things that were not really there. "I don't like these mirrors," So Young said, keeping her weapon ready. "They make me feel like we're being watched." Captain Dong-wook nodded. "Stay alert, everyone. After that gravity room, we know this structure is testing us. The next trial could be anything." As they walked deeper into the structure, Ji-woo noticed something odd about the reflections. "Captain, look at this. The mirrors are showing images of the alien species we saw in the gravity room, but they're alive and moving." Dr. Minho moved closer to examine one of the mirrors. In the reflection, he could see a tall, thin alien with 4 arms walking through the same corridor they were in now. But the alien looked terrified, constantly looking over its shoulder as if something was chasing it. "These might not be mirrors," he said. "They could be some kind of recording system showing us what happened to the previous visitors." Hyejin ran her scanner along the wall. "The energy readings are very strange here. There's some kind of field that extends throughout this entire section. It's affecting our brainwaves." "What do you mean?" Dong-wook asked. "I'm not sure, but the field seems to be scanning our minds, reading our thoughts and memories." Taeho stopped walking. Did anyone else just remember something from their childhood that they hadn't thought about in years? The others looked at him with concern. So Young frowned. "Now that you mention it, I just had a very clear memory of my first day in military training. But it felt more real than a normal memory, like I was actually there again. Something in this place is messing with our heads," Dong-wook said. "Everyone stay focused on the present. Don't let your minds wander." They continued walking, but the memory flashes became stronger and more frequent. Ji-woo suddenly stopped and stared at one of the mirrors with tears in her eyes. "Ji-woo, what's wrong?" Dr. Minho asked. "I can see my grandmother," she whispered. "She's right there in the mirror and she's talking to me. But she died 5 years ago." The others looked at the mirror, but they could only see their own reflections. Whatever Ji-woo was seeing was personal to her alone. "It's not real," Dong-wook said firmly. "Whatever this place is doing to your mind, fight it. Your grandmother is not here." But Ji-woo reached out toward the mirror. "She's telling me to come closer. She says she has something important to tell me." So Young grabbed Ji-woo's arm. "Don't touch that mirror. Something is trying to trick you." As they stood there arguing, the temperature in the corridor began to drop. Their breath started to form clouds in the cold air, and frost began to appear on the mirror surfaces. "Energy readings are spiking," Heejin reported. "Something big is coming." A low, hungry sound echoed through the corridor like the growl of a massive predator. The mirrors began to flicker and change, showing not reflections but darkness filled with moving shapes. "What is that thing?" Taeho asked, backing away from the mirrors. Dr. Minho checked his instruments frantically. "It's some kind of psychic entity. The readings suggest it feeds on mental energy, specifically memories and knowledge." "A memory eater," Dong-wook said grimly. "That explains why all those alien ships are empty. This thing consumed the minds of everyone who came here." The entity emerged from the mirrors like smoke becoming solid. It had no fixed shape, constantly shifting between different forms. Sometimes it looked like a massive spider, sometimes like a cloud of hungry darkness. The only constant was the feeling of ancient malice that radiated from it. The creature spoke, but not with words. Instead, it projected thoughts directly into their minds. The message was simple and terrifying. It was hungry, and it intended to feast on everything they knew and remembered. "Everyone get back to back," So Young ordered. "Don't let it separate us." The memory eater circled them like a predator studying its prey. Then it struck, sending tendrils of psychic energy toward their minds. The attack was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Dong-wook felt the creature trying to burrow into his thoughts, searching for his most precious memories. It wanted to know about his childhood, his family, his training to become a ship captain. But something unexpected happened when it tried to feed. Human memories, the creature discovered, were not organized like those of other species. Most aliens the entity had encountered before had minds that were structured and logical, with memories stored in neat categories. Humans were different. Human brains were chaotic, with memories connected in strange ways. A smell could trigger a memory of childhood that was connected to a song that reminded them of a movie that made them think of a friend. The creature found itself lost in the maze of human thought. It's having trouble with our minds, Dr. Minho realized. Human memory works differently than alien memory. So Young had an idea. During her military training, she had learned meditation techniques to maintain focus under stress. Everyone, try to empty your minds. Don't think about specific memories. Just focus on breathing. But Tejo had a different approach. Instead of emptying his mind, he began to deliberately think about things that were not real. He imagined impossible places, fictional characters, and made up stories from human entertainment. The memory eater became confused. It could not tell which of Tejo's thoughts were real memories and which were fantasies. The creature had never encountered a species that could imagine things so vividly that the imagined seemed as real as actual experience. "That's it," Jiwoo shouted. "Confuse it with fake memories." The crew began to flood their minds with fictional stories, imaginary adventures, and impossible scenarios. They thought about movies they had seen, books they had read, and games they had played. The memory eater found itself trying to consume stories about superheroes, space battles, and magical kingdoms. The creature reeled back, overwhelmed by the flood of false information. It had never encountered minds that could create such vivid unreality. Heejin took advantage of the creature's confusion. The energy field it's using has a specific frequency. If we can disrupt it, we might be able to trap it. Working quickly, she modified their portable equipment to generate an interference pattern. The others continued to bombard the creature with false memories and impossible stories. "It's working," Dr. Minho announced. "The creature is weakening." The memory eater made one last desperate attempt to feed, sending all its power into a final psychic attack. But the human minds it encountered were too strange, too chaotic, and too full of impossible things. Captain Dongwook had the final idea. Instead of just confusing the creature, he began to deliberately feed it a story. But not just any story. A tale about a memory eater that tried to consume human minds and ended up trapped by its own greed. The creature, already weakened and confused, absorbed this story as if it were a real memory. The fictional tale became part of its own existence, creating a paradox that the entity could not resolve. With a sound like breaking glass, the memory eater collapsed in on itself and was pulled into Heejin's containment field. The mirrors returned to normal, showing only their own tired but victorious reflections. "Is it dead?" So, Young asked. "Not dead," Dr. Minho said, checking his readings. "Contained. It's trapped in a loop, trying to process memories that contradict each other. Will it stay trapped? As long as the containment field holds, and as long as it keeps trying to understand human imagination." They looked ahead and saw that another doorway had opened at the end of the corridor. Beyond it, they could see lights. That suggested something important waited deeper in the structure. "2 trials down," Dongwook said. "Whatever built this place, it never expected to meet humans. Our minds are too messy for its tests." As they walked toward the next section, none of them noticed that the structure around them was changing. Deep in its ancient systems, the builder's artificial intelligence was analyzing what had just happened. These new visitors were unlike anything it had ever encountered. For the first time in 50,000 years, the structure was impressed. The doorway led them into a chamber that took their breath away. The room was massive, with walls that curved up and disappeared into shadows high above. But what made them all stop and stare were the objects floating throughout the space. Weapons, tools, and devices beyond human understanding filled the air around them. Some glowed with internal light, others seemed to bend space around themselves, and a few appeared to exist in more than 3 dimensions at once. The technology was so advanced that just looking at it made their eyes water. "This is incredible," Dr. Minho whispered, approaching a device that looked like a crystal flower made of pure energy. "These aren't just weapons. They're tools that could reshape reality itself." Captain Dongwook felt a chill run down his spine. Weapons like these could destroy entire star systems. What kind of species built all this? A new voice answered him, but it didn't come from any of his crew. The voice seemed to speak from the air itself, using perfect human language but with an accent that sounded ancient and tired. "We were called the architects," the voice said. "We built this structure as our final gift to the universe. A test, to find a species worthy of inheriting our knowledge." Hyejin spun around, looking for the source of the voice. "Who's speaking? Where are you?" "I am the consciousness of our greatest artificial mind, built to oversee this test. I have been waiting here for 50,000 years, watching species after species fail our trials." So Young kept her weapon ready, even though she had no target. "What happened to all those other species, the ones whose ships we saw?" "They failed the tests. They were preserved in stasis so that future species could learn from their mistakes. But you humans are different. You have passed trials that we believed were impossible to survive." The voice paused, and they could hear something like wonder in its tone. "Tell me, how did you survive the gravity maze? Every other species was torn apart by the conflicting forces." "We adapted," Dongwook said simply. "Humans are good at dealing with change." "And the memory eater?" "That creature consumed the knowledge of entire civilizations." "How did you resist it?" "We confused it," Jiwoo explained. "Our minds work differently than other species. We can imagine things that aren't real so clearly that even we sometimes forget they're not true." There was a long silence. Then the voice spoke again, and this time it sounded almost amused. "Fascinating. In all our planning, we never considered that chaos could be a strength. We architects prized order and logic above all else. It never occurred to us that a disorganized mind might be more flexible than an organized one." Taeho looked around at all the floating technology. "So what happens now? Do we get to take some of these weapons back to Earth?" "That depends on whether you can solve the final puzzle," the voice replied. "To claim our inheritance, you must first prove you understand how to use it." The floating devices began to move, arranging themselves into patterns around the room. Some formed geometric shapes, others created flowing lines of energy. The display was beautiful, but completely meaningless to human eyes. "Each device here operates on principles that go beyond your current science," the voice explained. "To activate them, you must solve puzzles that require not just intelligence, but what we called impossible thinking." Dr. Minho studied the nearest Myo device, a sphere that seemed to be made of liquid metal. "Impossible thinking? What does that mean?" "It means finding solutions that should not work, but do. The architects designed these puzzles to challenge the most advanced minds in the galaxy. No species has ever solved more than one or two of them." Hyejin approached a device that looked like a twisted piece of crystal. She ran her hands over its surface and felt a strange tingling sensation. "This feels familiar somehow, like a machine that's missing a part." "Every device here is incomplete," the voice confirmed. "They require additional components to function. But those components must be created by the user, using principles that the device itself will teach you." "That's impossible," So Young said. "How can we create parts for a machine we don't understand, using principles we don't know?" "Exactly," the voice replied. "Impossible thinking." But Hyejin was already working. As an engineer, she was used to fixing things with whatever materials she had available. She looked at the crystal device and then at the tools on her belt. "You know what?" she said to the others. "This reminds me of the time I had to fix our ship's engine with nothing but spare parts and wire. The solution didn't make sense according to the manual, but it worked." She began to disassemble one of her tools, pulling out components that had nothing to do with the alien device. Then she started connecting them to the crystal in ways that should have been completely wrong. "Hyejin, what are you doing?" Dongwook asked. "I'm not trying to understand how this thing is supposed to work," she explained, still tinkering. "I'm just trying to make it work with what we have." The crystal device suddenly flared to life, glowing with warm light. The voice of the architect sounded surprised. "Remarkable. You bypassed 17 layers of security and 3 fundamental laws of physics. The device is functioning at 80% efficiency, using completely incorrect principles." Taeho looked at another device, one that resembled a metal flower with petals that moved like liquid. If impossible thinking means doing things wrong that work anyway, then humans should be good at this. He began to approach the device not as a navigator, but as someone who had spent years finding ways around obstacles. Instead of trying to understand the device's purpose, he simply started pressing controls and moving parts until something happened. The flower device bloomed, revealing a core of pure energy that cast rainbows throughout the chamber. "This is incredible," Dr. Minho said, watching his colleagues succeed where advanced civilizations had failed. "We're solving these puzzles by not trying to solve them properly." "Exactly," Jiwoo added, working on a device that looked like a frozen storm cloud. "We're approaching them like humans would approach any broken machine. Try things until something works." One by one, the crew activated devices throughout the chamber. They used duct tape where advanced civilizations had tried, exotic materials. They bypassed complex systems with simple shortcuts. They treated reality-altering technology like it was a broken television that needed a good kick to work. The voice of the architect watched in amazement as device after device came to life under their hands. In 50,000 years, no species has activated more than 3 devices. You have activated 12. How is this possible? "We don't know what's impossible," So Young said, working on a weapon that seemed to be made of crystallized time. "So we just try things and see what happens. And when something doesn't work the way it's supposed to," Dongwook added, "we find another way to make it work anyway." The chamber was now filled with light and energy from the activated devices. The ancient technology hummed with power, ready to be used after 50 millennia of waiting. "You have proven yourselves worthy," the voice said, and now it sounded almost respectful. "But there is one final test, the most important one of all." A new doorway opened at the far end of the chamber, leading to what looked like a control room filled with screens and displays. Beyond that, they could see windows looking out into space where hundreds of alien ships floated in stasis fields. "The choice you make in the next room will determine not just your fate but the fate of every species that ever attempted our trials," the voice continued. "Are you ready to face the final test?" The crew looked at each other, then at the incredible technology surrounding them. They had come further than any species before them, but the hardest part was still ahead. "We've come this far," Dongwook said. "Let's finish what we started." Together they walked toward the final chamber, carrying with them the tools and weapons of the most advanced civilization the galaxy had ever known. But more importantly, they carried the one thing that had gotten them this far: the human ability to find a way when there seemed to be no way at all. The final chamber was unlike anything they had seen before. It was circular, with walls covered in screens showing the faces of hundreds of different alien species. Each screen displayed a different creature, all frozen in stasis, all waiting for someone to decide their fate. In the center of the room stood a single control panel with 2 large buttons. One was colored blue and labeled with symbols that seemed to mean take. The other was red with symbols that meant release. Captain Dongwook and his crew stood before the panel, understanding immediately what choice they were being asked to make. The voice of the architect confirmed their fears. "This is the final test," the ancient voice said. "You may take all our technology and knowledge back to your people. But if you do, all the species you see on these screens will remain in stasis forever. They will never wake up, never return to their homes." Dr. Minho looked at the screens showing hundreds of sleeping aliens. "How long have they been like this?" "Some for thousands of years, others for just decades. All of them reached this room just as you have. All of them made the same choice." "What choice?" So Young asked, though she already suspected the answer. "They chose to take our technology and leave the others behind. Every species that has ever reached this point has decided that their own advancement was more important than the lives of strangers." Hyojin studied the control panel carefully. "So our choices are to save these people and get nothing, or take the technology and leave them to die?" "That is correct. The test is simple. Will you sacrifice unlimited power to save the lives of people you do not know?" Taeho shook his head. "That's not a fair choice. Why can't we do both?" "Because," the voice replied, The power systems that maintain the stasis fields also power our technology vault. You cannot have both. This is the fundamental test of worthiness: power or compassion, advancement or mercy. The crew stood in silence, looking at the faces on the screens. They could see the fear frozen on many of the alien faces, the hope that someone would eventually save them. How many species are we talking about? Jiwoo asked. 237 different civilizations, over 50,000 individual beings, all trapped here because they failed our trials. Captain Dong-wook felt the weight of the decision, pressing down on him. The technology they could take back to Earth would advance human civilization by thousands of years. They could end poverty, cure diseases, and explore the galaxy like never before. But 50,000 innocent beings would remain trapped forever. There has to be another way, he said finally. There is no other way, the architect voice replied. The choice is binary. This is the test. But Hye-jin was studying the control panel more closely. As an engineer, she had learned to look beyond the obvious options. Captain, what if the choice isn't really binary? What if we're just being told it is? What do you mean? Look at this panel. It's designed like every other piece of architect technology we've seen. Very logical, very organized. But we've learned that their logical approach isn't the only way to solve problems. So-young understood first. You want to hack it, not hack it. Fix it, like we fixed all those other devices. Make it work the way it should work, not the way it was designed to work. The architect voice sounded alarmed. That is not possible. The systems are locked. You cannot change the fundamental parameters of the test. Maybe you can't, Taeho said, grinning. But we're humans. We're really good at making things work in ways they weren't supposed to. Dr. Minho began scanning the control systems with his instruments. The power distribution network is incredibly complex, but it's also very inefficient. The architects built it to be perfect, but perfection isn't always the best solution. What do you see? Dong-wook asked. Redundancy. Lots and lots of redundancy. The system has backup power sources for the backup power sources. It's like they were so afraid of anything failing that they built 10 times more capacity than they needed. Hye-jin smiled. So if we can make the system more efficient, we might be able to power both the stasis fields and the technology transfer. That should not be possible, the architect voice protested. We designed this system to be optimal. You designed it to be safe, Jiwoo corrected, but sometimes safe isn't optimal. Working together, the crew began to modify the control systems. They used the same approach that had worked on the weapons in the previous chamber. Instead of trying to understand the architect logic, they applied human engineering principles. Hye-jin rerouted power through systems that were designed as backups, turning redundant safety measures into additional power sources. Taeho used his navigation skills to map the energy flows and find more efficient paths. Dr. Minho analyzed the biological requirements for the stasis fields and found ways to reduce their power consumption without harming the sleeping aliens. This is impossible, the architect voice said, but it sounded more amazed than angry. You are violating dozens of fundamental engineering principles. Human engineering principles, So-young said. Sometimes the best solution is the one that shouldn't work but does anyway. As they worked, the screens around the room began to flicker. The faces of the sleeping aliens seemed to shift and move, as if they were beginning to dream again after years of empty sleep. Power efficiency is increasing, Dr. Minho reported. We're getting more energy output with less input. It's like the system wanted to be more efficient all along. Stasis field stability is holding, Taeho added. The aliens are safe. And we're still getting full access to the technology archives, Hye-jin announced. Both systems are running at optimal levels. The architect voice was quiet for a long moment. When it spoke again, it sounded different. Less ancient and tired, more curious and alive. In 50,000 years, no species even attempted to change the test parameters. They all accepted that. The choice was binary, but you refused to accept our limitations. It's what humans do, Dong-wook said simply. When someone tells us something is impossible, we try to prove them wrong. But why? Why risk everything to save strangers? Your species could have advanced beyond imagination with our technology. Because, Jiwoo said, advancing beyond imagination isn't worth much if you have to leave your imagination behind to get there. The screens around the room began to brighten. The sleeping aliens started to stir as their stasis fields prepared to release them. At the same time, streams of data began flowing into the crew's equipment, downloading the complete technological archives of the architect civilization. You have created a new possibility, the architect voice said. Something we never considered, in all our wisdom. You have shown that the greatest test is not choosing between two options, but refusing to accept that only two options exist. The chamber filled with light as both systems reached full activation. The crew could hear sounds from throughout the structure as alien ships began to power up, and their crews started to wake from decades or centuries of sleep. What happens now? Dr. Minho asked. Now you return to your people, carrying our knowledge, and the friendship of 237 civilizations. You have not just passed our test, you have redefined what it means to be worthy. As they prepared to leave the chamber, Captain Dongwook looked back at the control panel they had modified. Will other species be able to solve it the way we did? No, the architect voice replied. Because we are changing the test. From now on, instead of forcing visitors to choose between power and compassion, we will challenge them to find ways to have both. You have taught us that the greatest wisdom is knowing that impossible is just another word for not yet attempted. The crew made their way back through the structure, but now it was different. The halls were filled with the sounds of waking aliens, speaking in dozens of different languages. The ancient trap had become a rescue station, and humanity had made it possible. When they reached their ship, they found dozens of alien vessels preparing to depart alongside them. Some of the crews had been trapped for so long they had given up hope of ever seeing home again. Now they looked at the human crew with something approaching reverence. How did you do it? Asked a tall alien with 6 arms and golden skin. Every species that came here before chose the technology over our lives. We chose to change the rules instead, Dongwook replied. Sometimes the best solution is the one nobody thought of yet. As the Perseverance led the convoy of freed ships back toward known space, the crew reflected on what they had accomplished. They carried with them technology that would revolutionize human civilization, but more importantly, they carried the respect and friendship of hundreds of species. Do you think we'll see any of them again? Taeho asked, watching the alien ships spread out to return to their home worlds. I think we'll be seeing a lot more of the galaxy than we expected, Dongwook replied. Word travels fast out here. Before long, every species will know that humans are the people who change the impossible into the inevitable. The ancient structure fell silent behind them, but it was no longer a trap. It had become something new, something better, because a small crew of humans had refused to accept that better was impossible. And across the galaxy, the name of humanity was being spoken with respect for the first time, as the species that had defied death not by fighting it, but by changing what death meant.